Hi, I'm John Modern. I'm a real estate broker here in Golden, Colorado. I've been working in Golden, Colorado and Western Denver since 2014, and you're probably here because you're considering a move to Golden. And if you are, I promise, you're going to get real, unfiltered, candid opinions about living here, what it's like to live here, the cost, and the reality of it. I don't want to confuse you. I love Golden, but there's a couple of things you need to know before living here. I feel like everybody always talks about 300 plus days of sunshine, everything's perfect, it's just a few minutes to downtown Denver. But there are things that you should know before moving here, and we're going to talk about a lot of that today. I encourage you to stay for the full video. There's a lot of content here. We're going to talk about the different areas, things to do on the weekend, things to avoid on the weekend, and kind of what the local opinion is. All right, item one, the tourist factor. Golden gets really busy, and not just because of Golden. As you know, Denver is just a few minutes down the road. So on the weekends, if the weather's nice, it's going to be crowded. Expect to really try to look hard for parking, expect the trails to be busy, expect to wait for coffee, expect a line at the pizza joint, all of that stuff. So if you are planning to come to Golden and you want not such a busy experience, maybe think about heading out on a Tuesday morning instead of a Saturday morning if you can. It gets extremely crowded. You've got to be careful with parking. They will ticket, they will enforce. As a local, I kind of pop into town during the week if I can. You can generally park anywhere, get coffee pretty quickly if you do that versus, fighting all of the people coming to see Buffalo's Bills grave on the weekend. Especially during college tours, you get a huge influx of tourists during that time where parents and their children are coming to look at the School of Mines. Now, at the same time, you might be thinking, shoot, I don't want to, go to a small town and wait for dinner. However, you're not going to big, busy chain restaurants. Everything is local. There's tons of local businesses up and down the street. You're not going to, end up at Outback Steakhouse waiting in line. There's local restaurants, local dining, local bars, breweries galore, tons of breweries, tons of coffee shop. What we don't have is like major shopping. It's close by, but you're not going to find a TJ Maxx in the middle of Golden, Colorado. You're not going to find a giant Starbucks 20 feet from another giant Starbucks, 30 feet from another giant Starbucks. We've got all of the amenities that you need, like major grocery stores, but again, you're not going to run into the big chains like TGI Fridays in downtown Golden. So the nearest major shopping would probably be Colorado Mills, and you'll find all your big box amenities there. You need to go to Best Buy, you need to go to Target. Who doesn't need a Target somewhat nearby? So all of that stuff is within reach, but you're hopping in the car. It's not a 2-minute drive, it's maybe 5 to 10 minutes away, depending on where you choose to live. There are people coming from bigger cities who are going to love this, and there are people who are going to find it inconvenient. It just really depends on the profile of the person moving here. The quality over quantity is probably one of Golden's biggest value propositions. It's a relatively small town. There's only about 20,000 people that live here. So when you're coming from Chicago, when you're coming from LA, when you're coming from DC, New York, some of these really big metros, and you're looking for a smaller community, you're definitely going to get that, but you're going to get the pros and cons of that. Your distance to Denver and DTC depends really a lot on when you're traveling. If you're going to downtown Denver in the middle of rush hour, expect a 20 to 30 minute commute. If there's snow, if there's ice, that could turn a 30-minute commute into an hour and a half, depending on where you choose to live. There are a lot of options in the foothills and surrounding kind of downtown Golden that with a little bit of snow, you might want to either choose to live closer in or up in the foothills if you have flexibility where you can work from home for some days. Highway 6 is probably a little less congested than I-70 during rush hour, but again, it all depends on where you're coming from and where you have to go. Just know that a little bit of wintry mix can really change your commute situation here in Golden. I think the people that this works for really well are people who have the option to work from home. Those people who have been called back into the office 5 days a week might struggle living in certain parts of Golden because of how much snow the foothills get and how different your commute can be depending on the time of year and the weather. Working from home, you're going to have great internet options in most areas, and it's not going to be a big deal. We also do have 300 days of sunshine. I don't want to make the weather seem inaccessible. I think that's one of the big myths about living in Golden or living in Colorado, period, is that we all live in the high country where they get 10 feet of snow in the winter and we're traveling around by snowmobiles. That's not really the case for day-to-day life in Golden. We have over 300 days of sunshine. When the snow comes, it can be really intense, especially in the hilly neighborhoods. But for the most part, the sun wipes out the snow pretty quickly. Another thing you want to be really conscious of that you probably aren't thinking about is if you're living in the foothills, do you live in a north-facing slope or a south-facing slope? If you're living with southern exposure, meaning that the hill you're on, if you're in the foothills, faces the sun in the wintertime, you might not have to shovel your driveway. It might be a situation where the sun does all the hard work for you. On the other side of that coin, if you're not being conscious of north, south, east, west, where the sun is during the winter, you could be in a shadow for a quarter of the year, meaning the snow builds up, it gets icy, and it doesn't really go away without a lot of heavy lifting. So be really cognizant of kind of what type of hill you're buying on if you are buying in the foothills, because that's a real consideration and something I think a lot of Coloradans, even in the valley, think about. If your driveway is on the north side, it's in a shadow all the time, it's hard to clear. If your driveway's on the south side, it's almost a non-issue. So I think people who end up loving the weather here come from four-season areas. I grew up in the Washington, D.C. metro in Virginia, and the winters, while the average temperature was probably a little higher than it is here in Colorado, because of the humidity, it always felt colder. It was that kind of cold that gets into your bones. If you're from Chicago, New York, Pennsylvania, the Northeast, or anywhere around the Great Lakes, you know what I'm talking about. That humid wind chill just gets into your bones. And so when you come to Colorado and you go outside and it's 35 degrees but the sun is shining, sometimes you just feel like you could wear a t-shirt in that weather, and it's really comfortable, and you realize really quickly the myth of the winter in Colorado, because it is actually pretty mild with how dry it is here. I think the people who struggle with it are folks from California, where it's perfect and 60 to 80 degrees year round, and all of a sudden you're living outside of that window of temperature. It's just a little harder to adjust. Or people who spent winters in Arizona, who are used to 70 degree days, perfect sun, and not really a lot of snow ever. So it's all relative. It all depends on where you're coming from and what your expectations are. But again, as someone who comes from the east, the winters here are extremely mild. And I know plenty of Californians who have adjusted. A lot of Texans really love it here because our summers, while they do get hot and you can be in the hundreds for a week, they're still way milder. And I would say a Texas day at 80 degrees is worse than a Colorado day at 105. And ask any Texas buddy who's lived here, they're going to verify that information. So housing costs and availability. Again, this, similar to the weather, is going to feel different and relative to where you're coming from. When I was in my 20s thinking about buying a house in Northern Virginia near Washington, D.C., I was looking at townhouses way, way outside of the metro that were in my budget that I could afford, and it wasn't that exciting. And when I got to Denver, all of a sudden I realized I could buy a house in a cool up-and-coming part of the city and afford it, and have trails 15 minutes away and the city 15 minutes away. And that's why I came here. I came here because I wanted access to the mountains and the outdoors, not just on the weekends when I had to drive hours away, but because I wanted it to be a part of my daily life. I wanted to be able to mountain bike out my door or drive very close to get to a mountain bike trail. And if I had to work downtown at an office, I could do that on a Wednesday after work and it not be some huge chore. So the cost of living in Golden, the average house, I'm going to do another video. We'll talk about what $1 million gets you. And, it's not a lot. If you're coming from Los Angeles County, it's going to feel relatively inexpensive. If you're coming from Wichita, Kansas, this is going to seem like Aspen to you. The cost of housing has gone up radically in the past 5 years, especially post-COVID. A lot of people have ridden that wave. A lot of people seem like they're waiting to buy. The truth is, in Golden, there's only 20,000 people. So the inventory is extremely limited. There's not a ton of housing to choose from, and that keeps the pricing and the demand relatively high. I'd say there's a lot more people that want to be here than are actually here. So there's a lot of geographic constraints that contribute towards that limited inventory. Golden's right up against the mountains. And you may not know this, but Golden was actually supposed to be the capital. Denver and Golden were battling to be the capital of Colorado way back in the 1800s, and Denver won because they could foresee that expansion and the limitations that Golden had versus being in Denver, where you could kind of grow and become very large. Whereas with Golden, you're up against the mountains. There's two mesas. There's South Table Mesa, there's North Table Mesa, and there's also the foothills just to the west. So you're kind of like sandwiched, Clear Creek runs through the middle, and there's only so many places to go. And South Table and North Table are both protected open spaces in Jefferson County, and so there's no building there, which is a great thing, but again, limited housing. The median home price versus the surrounding areas is much higher because of this. You're going to see a lot of multiple offer situations, rental market tightness. I've seen rents go really high. Sales prices have continued to surge, even in a down market. In the past year, 2 years, the real estate market's really contracted in a lot of areas. And so when people ask me often, how's the market? My first question is, well, where? Where are you talking about? Are you talking about in Broomfield? Are you talking Westminster, Castle Rock, Denver, Golden? These are all such different microeconomies that for Golden, we've been very lucky and we've still seen appreciation even in these down years. And that is largely due to the lack of inventory and the high demand that continues to exist. It's smaller than you think. I think, I touched on it's about 20,000 people, give or take, as of 2024. There's new data coming out. I don't expect that to be wildly different than the 2024 census. You're going to run into people that some people love that, some people don't. But you should know it if you're considering a move here, that it's going to become a very familiar place pretty quickly. And the people who it appeals to versus who it doesn't is another big factor to consider. Obviously you have your school of mind, so you have tons of students, college age, and you certainly see and feel that in day-to-day life in Golden. But I'd say the primary resident in Golden are young families, aging families. It's somewhere that, you go with your young kids and you don't really leave. This is where you've chosen to lay your roots and make your nest and kind of see your kids through high school. Not just any families though. These families, like, their kids are professional skiers, half of them, or professional mountain bikers. So the outdoor lifestyle almost isn't an option in Golden. It is a default. And if you don't want to be asked which ski pass you're getting this year versus what your job is, don't move here. If your career is more important than your ski pass, there's neighborhoods in Denver that will appeal to you more. Golden is all about the outdoors. People moved here because you can ride out the door on your mountain bike to world-class bike trails, hiking trails. You can drive just up Clear Creek Canyon just a little bit and drop in with a tube and a cooler and float back into town. During the summer, all you're gonna see is just tubes flying down Clear Creek and people having the time of their life. You're gonna see people cold plunging in the creek in the winter. I mean, these are the kind of people, I wanna give you an idea, that are going to be your neighbors. Weekend conversations revolve around outdoor activity. Trail access is everywhere. You could work at Coors, hop on your mountain bike and go up the mountain and come back for your lunch break. There are a ton of bike companies in Golden where they actually do lunch rides, and you'll see them out and about in the foothills during their lunch break. So to kind of sum it up, Golden's not for everybody. It's not for people who want a big city feel or who don't want to run into folks that they know. Golden's for people who take off early every Friday to go hit the ski slopes, to go ride their bike, or to get up in the mountains for a getaway. It's somewhere that you come to not prioritize just working 9 to 5 every single day. It's definitely a place. I came here because it's a great town that's familiar with good schools, and it's next to the Rocky Mountains. And that's kind of what it's all about in Golden. So if you're thinking about moving to Golden and you want to make Golden home, or you just have questions about the area, give me a call. I'm a real person. I answer the phone. You're not going to talk to some secretary or admin. Ask me to go see a house. Let's go see a house. Let's go see what your budget does in this town, and if this is the place for you. Like, subscribe, do all the fun algorithm things. We've got tons of content coming up. And drop a comment. I love interacting with everybody on here. So if you have a question about something I didn't cover, just let me know down below. Until next time.